On July the 2nd, 2026, a 68-year-old man was trimming bushes outside his home in Bethel Township, Pennsylvania. The temperature had passed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He collapsed. He did not survive. That same day, over 165 million Americans were under heat alerts, stretching from the Midwest to the East Coast. A heat dome had locked temperatures at levels that had not been recorded in over a century in some cities, and the country's electrical grid was being pushed toward its breaking point. And here is what nobody is saying loudly enough. That first heat dome broke. The temperatures came down. And then a second one started forming immediately in the West. America did not get a summer. It is getting a relay race of catastrophic heat events with almost no recovery time in between. Like and subscribe, because what is coming next is not a forecast. It is already here. Conditions, combined with human-caused climate change, increase both the frequency and the severity of heat waves. NOAA's Spring Outlook, released in late March, predicted widespread above-average temperatures for much of the country through summer. The signals were there. The warnings were issued. And still, when the heat dome arrived in late June, the scale of what happened shocked everyone who experienced it. Like and subscribe. Because when scientists say super El Nino and climate change in the same sentence, what you're about to feel in July is exactly what they were describing. A heat dome forms when a strong high-pressure system parks over a region and acts like a lid on the atmosphere. Hot air that would normally rise and disperse gets compressed back down toward the surface, where it heats even further. Cloud formation is suppressed, so there is no shade and no rain to break the cycle. Humidity builds. Overnight temperatures stop dropping low W enough to give the land and the people on it any real recovery. The heat dome that settled over the central and eastern United States. Starting in late June 2026 was one of the most powerful and widespread versions of this phenomenon ever recorded over the country. A high-pressure atmospheric blocking pattern stalled directly over more than two-thirds of the contiguous United States, trapping intense surface heat and soaring humidity across major metropolitan corridors and directly impacting more than 200 million Americans. Like and subscribe, because a weather system covering two-thirds of the United States and affecting 200 million people is not a regional event. It is a national emergency. The temperature records that fell during this event were not close calls. They were decisive breaks with history. On July the 2nd, Newark hit 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Philadelphia reached 103, and Washington, D.C. hit 102. Boston touched 101 degrees, which, for a city built on the assumption of cool Atlantic summers, is extraordinary. Atlantic City recorded 103. New York City's Central Park reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. recorded 102 degrees on July 3rd, tying the existing record, and then broke it the next day with 103 degrees on the 4th of July. The heat indices, which measure what the temperature actually feels like when humidity is factored in, were even more extreme. Forecasters recorded heat indices of 110 degrees in New York City, 112 in Philadelphia, 113 in Washington, D.C., and 111 in Nashville, Tennessee. Like and subscribe. Because when Washington, D.C. feels like 113 degrees on the 4th of July, something has fundamentally changed about the American summer. The human toll of this heat dome was immediate and deadly. At least 44 heat-related fatalities were confirmed during the peak period from July 1st through July 4th. 29 of those deaths occurred in New Jersey alone. 7 people died in Pennsylvania. 4 died in Illinois, 3 in New York, 1 in Mississippi. These are not numbers from a war zone or a natural disaster in a developing country. These are Americans dying of heat in one of the wealthiest naciones on Earth during a holiday weekend when most of the country was trying to celebrate. The CDC has documented that heat is the leading weather-related cause of death in the United States, responsible for more than 13,000 deaths since 2018. And the pace of those deaths is not slowing. It is accelerating. Like and subscribe, because 44 Americans died of heat in 4 days. That number is not getting the coverage it deserves. The electrical grid nearly broke. PJM interconnection? The grid operator that supplies power to approximately 65 million customers across Washington, D.C. and 13 states, including New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, Virginia, and Michigan, issued an emergency declaration. The declaration went into effect at 11:59 p.m. on July 1st and ran through July 4th. It directed PJM to conserve energy by curtailing power to data centers that had backup generators and other non-emergency high-consumption facilities. PJM was forecasting a peak electricity demand of 166,304 megawatts on July 3rd, peak demand that is going to be a record across different geographical areas. More than 200,000 customers were without power on Thursday evening alone. Like and subscribe, because when the U.S. electrical grid requires an emergency declaration to function during a heat wave. The infrastructure holding this country together is closer to its limits than most people realize. In New York City, Con Edison implemented voltage reductions in Staten Island, Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Westchester to prevent wider outages. Thousands of customers lost power across the metro area. And without power and temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the interior of a home becomes lethal faster than most people understand. Medical experts documented that in exterior temperatures of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, a home interior without air conditioning can reach body-threatening temperature thresholds within 1 to 2 hours on upper floors. Upper stories and poorly ventilated rooms heat up fastest. The behavior pattern that turns a power outage into a death is simple. People wait to see if the power comes back. They assume they are safer inside than outside. They do not recognize the escalating danger until it is too late. Heat does not announce itself the way a flood or a tornado does. It kills quietly in homes, in cars, in workplaces, often alone. Like and subscribe because the gap between a power outage and a heat fatality during a heat dome is measured in hours, not days. Transportation collapsed in parallel. Amtrak issued warnings that trains on the Northeast Corridor would need to operate at reduced speeds between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. through July 4th because of the forecasted extreme temperatures, which cause rail tracks to expand and buckle. New Jersey Transit trains into New York were also expected to face delays and cancellations due to heat damage to equipment. In Wisconsin, videos circulated of vehicles catching air on a freeway ramp, where the road surface had buckled under the heat. The infrastructure of a modern country, the roads, the rails, the power lines, the cooling systems in hospitals and nursing homes, is not designed for temperatures this extreme sustained over this many consecutive days. And the fact that this happened during the July 4th holiday, when more people than usual were traveling, gathering outdoors, and expecting to celebrate, amplified every risk. Like and subscribe, because when the roads are buckling and the trains are slowing and the grid is on emergency alert all at the same time, the scale of the problem is bigger than any single news story can capture. A world weather attribution analysis released during the heat wave found that the intensity Y of the heat and humidity combined would have been virtually impossible without the effects of fossil fuel pollution and human-caused climate change. This is not a political statement. It is a scientific finding from the same organization that has analyzed every major heat event of the past decade. The analysis found that climate change did not cause this heat wave in isolation, but it made it dramatically more intense and more likely to occur. The same analysis framework found that Europe's record heat last month, in which approximately 20,000 people died across the continent, would have been virtually impossible 50 years ago without the warming that has accumulated since the industrial era. These are not projections about future possibilities. They are forensic analyses of events that already happened. Like and subscribe, because the science connecting. Fossil fuel emissions to heat wave deaths is no longer theoretical. It is documented event by event in real time by researchers publishing peer-reviewed findings within days of each disaster. Now let us talk about what came next, because what happened after the 4th of July is the part of this story that explains why the title of this video says, "The heat is not over." Severe thunderstorms swept across the United States from July 4th through July 6th, breaking up the first heat dome and bringing temperatures down across the Northeast and Midwest. Those storms caused more than 1.3 million power outages on their own and killed 4 more people. The largest hailstone in Connecticut state history fell during that system. The storms were, in a grim way, a relief from the heat, but they were also destructive in their own right. And while the eastern heat dome was breaking apart, a second heat dome had already begun forming over the western half of the continent. Like and subscribe, because the first heat dome breaking did not mean the summer was over. It meant round 2 was starting on the other side of the country. The western heat dome that formed after July 6th was every bit as dangerous as the eastern one. Over 100 million Americans came under some form of heat advisory as the second major dome event of summer 2026 settled over the region. Salt Lake City hit 109 degrees Fahrenheit, setting a new all-time temperature record for the city. Billings, Montana shattered its own all-time temperature record. The Weather Prediction Center warned that prolonged daytime heat and record warm overnight lows would produce widespread major to locally extreme heat risk through the middle of the week, with anyone lacking reliable cooling or sufficient water facing the greatest threat. The National Weather Service's Heat Risk Tool, a product specifically designed to communicate the danger of heat to vulnerable populations, led to a WAES showing its highest alert levels across a wide swath of the West. Forecasters at AccuWeather projected mid-110s in Phoenix and Palm Springs, low 110s in Las Vegas, and temperatures 10 to 20 degrees above historical averages from the Midwest to the Mid-Atlantic as the Western Dome expanded eastward. Like and subscribe because a second heat dome forming before the first one had fully dissipated is not normal. And forecasters are now openly discussing whether biweekly extreme heat events are becoming the new structure of the American summer. The western heat dome brought a compounding risk that the eastern dome did not have as intensely: wildfire. Communities baking under 110-degree temperatures are simultaneously dealing with elevated fire danger, poor air quality from active wildfires, and, in some cases, smoke drifting from Canadian wildfires that began during the same summer. On July 16th, smoke from the 2026 Canadian wildfires actually limited temperature increases in the Lehigh Valley region, which tells you something about the scale of the wildfire activity happening across North America simultaneously with the heat. Fire behavior experts have noted for years that extreme heat, drought, and wildfire risk form a feedback loop. Heat dries out vegetation, dry vegetation burns more easily and more intensely. Large wildfires generate their own local weather systems. Smoke reduces air quality over enormous areas, and populations trying to escape heat by going outside find themselves breathing hazardous air instead. Like and subscribe because the heat dome and the wildfire smoke are not separate disasters. They are two sides of the same summer catastrophe. Forecasters from AccuWeather and the National Weather Service have projected that the western heat dome will expand into much of the Midwest in mid-July, with cities from Minneapolis to Chicago to Kansas City potentially experiencing their highest temperatures of the year, with readings 10 to 20 degrees above historical averages. The heat may push back into parts of the mid-Atlantic region for a second time, barely a week after the region was recovering from the first dome. Salt Lake City is projected to see highs in the low to mid-100s through multiple consecutive days. Denver could see temperatures reach the upper 90s to near 100. The North American monsoon, which typically arrives in the desert southwest in mid to late July and brings thunderstorm activity and some moisture relief, may provide partial relief to Arizona and New Mexico, but the timing and extent of monsoon moisture is not guaranteed, and the heat already baked into the region will not disappear overnight even when the ridge breaks down. Like and subscribe because the forecast for the rest of July 2026 is not improving, it is extending. The structural question underneath all of this is the one that every emergency manager, every grid operator, every public health official, and every city government is quietly asking. Can American infrastructure absorb a summer in which severe heat events arrive every 2 weeks with minimal recovery time between them? The July 4th dome exposed how thin the margins are in the Northeast. Major cities lost power. People died. Trains slowed, roads buckled. The Western Dome is now testing the same margins in communities that are simultaneously fighting active wildfires and managing smoke from fires burning across the Canadian border. The answer to the structural question is not reassuring. An aging power grid designed for peak demands from decades ago, a housing stock with millions of units without air conditioning, a public health system underfunded for the scale of heat-related illness it is now managing every summer, and a political system that has not yet built the infrastructure investment needed to keep pace with a changing climate. These are not new problems. They are problems that have been documented, studied, and reported on for years. What is new is the speed at which those problems are arriving all at once. Like and subscribe because the heat wave you just lived through or watched on the news is not a weather event. It is an infrastructure stress test. And the results are telling us things we cannot ignore. The summer of 2026 is not half over. The pattern established by El Niño conditions, by the atmospheric setup that produced back-to-back heat domes within days of each other, and by the long-term warming trend that makes each of these events more intense than the last, suggests that what comes next will not be relief. Record heat returned to the Lehigh Valley as recently as July 15th. The Western Dome rebuilt over the Great Basin and Plains on July the 12th, exactly as forecasters had warned it might. The monsoon that might bring some relief is not guaranteed to arrive early or to cover the areas that need it most. And the Canadian wildfire season is still active, meaning smoke events that reduce air quality across the northern United States will continue to arrive without warning. If you are in a vulnerable population, if you're elderly, if you work outdoors, if you live without reliable air conditioning, if you care for someone who does, the message from every forecaster and every public health authority is the same. This is not over. Stay informed, stay cool, check on your neighbors, and understand that the summer you are living through right now is not an anomaly. It is the future arriving ahead of schedule. Like and subscribe and turn on notifications because this story will not stop moving and you need to be here when the next development breaks.